Hi everybody, welcome back to another episode of my Dungeon Boss Hero Priority Guide series. This episode here is going to deal with healers. And so now that we're dealing with kind of class-specific heroes, we can actually compare some of the metrics a little bit closer to each other versus when I did the original Hero Priority Guide, where some of those things didn't really jive that well. So now we'll actually be able to compare like individuals to other like individuals and ultimately come up with who's sort of the best and who's the highest priority. So I want to address right from the start that these next few episodes of this series isn't going to be necessarily the priority guide per se, but more so of analyzing the overall stats and skills of these heroes to see who's sort of the best one. In general, I think when we see who the best one is, that will also give you an indication of your priority, because ideally, if you're running these for campaign dungeons or boss mode, you'll want the quote-unquote best heroes to do so. So this isn't going to factor in anything with PvP just yet. Obviously, PvP and certain types of heroes just don't work. There's such a strong meta in PvP right now that trying to come up with the absolute best heroes for PvP is kind of a moot point. And really, there's only about 10 different heroes that are really heavily used in PvP anyways. So how did I go about determining the best rankings here? So I broke it into 10 different facets that I've been analyzing here. And some of them will have more importance than others. And we'll address that at the end as well. So the first thing that I looked at for healers is going to be the attack. Just to mention, I'm covering all four of the base skills for every one of these that I do here. So the attack is the first skill that I'm looking at, and obviously attack is not a huge issue for healers. Ideally, when you're running dungeons, the healers aren't really attacking that much, with the exception of Nub Nub, because his attacks can also heal as well. Next up, I'm considering defense. Defense is a main staple for healers because if they don't stay alive, they don't heal. So obviously a high defense is important to have. So as far as defense goes, we can see the highest defense here is actually Ember, and the lowest defense is actually Yasmin. So it doesn't bode well for Yasmin. Next up is the skill. Skill impacts criticals as well as some basic abilities like healing, so it's definitely an important one for healers as well. Highest skill, coincidentally, is Cobressa, which as far as healer goes, she's probably the least healer out of everybody that I considered, but she does have the healer tag, so I did include her. The worst skill out of everybody is Emily, which is also not terribly surprising because she's not totally a true healer. I mean, she's got a kind of a specific use. Next up is going to be the health. Health is similar along the lines of defense, where you need a decent health pool to survive. If you're dead, you can't heal. So what makes a good healer is being able to stay alive. So Augustus ranked number 1 in this category, likely due to his health and armor. He's going to have some good survivability, as well as his defense as well. So ranking last was Bobble. When I looked at the stats overall, Bobble is just incredibly low health. I was actually surprised, being that he's essentially a legendary rare type hero. I expected him to be a lot higher health pool, but that's what I found out. So the next stat here is the availability of tokens. Now this one here is not necessarily how good the hero is, but more so of a priority situation in terms of, is it possible for me to get these heroes? So looking at healers, the only ones that are readily available, which would be from the normal campaign, are Yasmin and Nub Nub, and then we have a bunch of them in the middle that have a few challenge mode tokens, and then we have the big ones at the end, Zen, Cobressa, Ember, and Bauble, that really have no availability of tokens. Ember, obviously, if you are at the end of the game, you can get some Aether and you can actually get her tokens, but in the scheme of things, I'm going to consider her right up there with the heroic ones as far as just not very much availability. Because if you are anywhere but the end of the game, you pretty much can't get Ember tokens unless you just farm somebody else out beyond 6-star. Okay, next up, looking at the rare Evos. This is going to be dealing with Ascensions. The Ascensions are obviously important for healers because you need to be able to get all of your skills available. Now, in general, when we're considering who's the best hero, a lot of times we're going to compare them in terms of, let's assume they already have all of their skills available. But in terms of factoring in some sort of priority, we also need to know how hard it is to get individual skills here. So, in terms of leveling up the heroes, again, Yasmin and Numnut, because they are early heroes, have very low cost to fully ascend, whereas someone like Ember Sanguine has absolute ridiculous number of Evos to ascend. She's actually, in terms of comparing to everybody else, she's probably like 4 or 5 times more than anybody else in the game. It costs her a total of 55 Celestial Evos to do both of her ascensions, which if you're trying to do that at level 20 or 30, good luck with that. Even if you manage to get the Aether to give her some stars, that rare Evo situation is going to be tough. Okay, next up is going to be, originally I considered this to be how many actual heals does this hero have, but when I started looking at it, I realized that Dungeon Boss doesn't really have any type of support character like we would see with other RPGs. So what I considered is I considered healing and support as far as this category goes. So essentially every hero has 4 skills. They have an attack and they have 3 skills. So the most you could have was 4. The least you could have was 0 in terms of benefiting the rest of the team. So those heroes that actually had the best possible support were going to be Yasmin, Zen, and Ember. Those that actually had the worst were Emily for the most part. So Emily and Daggerin and Sifu really don't have much, and neither does Cobressa. Okay, one of the other next big features here is energy cost. In order to be a good healer, you need to be able to whip out your heals, so the energy cost is obviously a big deal here. So the winner in energy cost is actually Sifu Jianzi, which is one of his few shiny moments as a healer. He's more of a warrior than a healer, in my opinion. The worst energy out of everybody, I would consider an asterisk by this one, is Emily, because her resurrection costs a ton. If we factored her resurrection and ignored that, then the worst ones are going to be Nub Nub and Augustus, and Emily will actually bump herself up quite a bit. Her energy use for her other 2 skills is actually fairly reasonable. Okay, next up is one of the traits that I use for the other series, which is going to be basically the team traits in terms of which heroes actually have traits that are going to benefit the entire team. As a support / healing character, you want to be able to have traits that are going to benefit people, and so this here will fit the mold. So the 2 that have the most traits available are Zen and Augustus. Zen obviously has some neat things, and so does Augustus. He's got his passive healing that he can do, and he's got his retaliation against demons as well. Okay, lastly, I also considered speed into this mix here. So I know this one is a little bit tough in terms of really comparing everybody, because realistically everybody is the same speed, with the exception of Zen and Ember are fast, and Nub Nub is slow. He's the only slow healer, so he gets some major strikes against him in terms of speed here. So ultimately, speed may not be something you actually consider, but when you're running campaign dungeons with Nub Nub, if he's slow, that is definitely a disadvantage, because you can't heal until after the normal speed round. And so if you're running dungeons that have a lot of normal enemies, Nub Nub's healing gets kind of back-shelved. So you have to always be cautious of that, which is partially why I included this, because it is a factor. So where does that leave us in terms of who is the best, or who should be the highest priority? So I ran a number of different scenarios here. I didn't just take those 10 attributes that I mentioned and just ball that all into one. That's obviously the first one I did here. So when we consider overall all 10 of those attributes, results look like this here. We have, in order, we have Ember, Zen, Yasmin, and Augustus are tied, and then Dagran round out the top 5. So the bottom, Nub Nub and Emily. Emily, I don't really dispute that as her being the worst healer because she's not really there to heal. But the obvious one here that stands out is kind of Nub Nub. So a lot of people consider Nub Nub to be one of the best healers in the game, and myself included in that as well. I don't dispute that. But from a sheer number standpoint, unless we rebalance some of these traits a little bit and we give more weight to certain aspects, which in some cases we may just not be able to have a tangible way to assess Nub Nub to really outline his greatness. So let's think for a second. If we remove the attack component and we don't consider attacks because healers aren't really known for their attacking. So where does that put us then? So top 5, Yasmin, Zen, Ember, Augustus. So notice the top 4 didn't actually change, and then Cobressa was number 5. So comparing 2 different metrics overall and no attack, Yasmin, Zen, Ember, Augustus are still the top 4. And at the bottom, we see Bobble and Emily. Emily's at the bottom again. And then Nub Nub actually rose up a little bit. He's still not the top tier, but he's still better than bottom of the barrel. So now let's consider, okay, we factored out attack. What happens if we ignored speed? That was one of the big ones that Nub Nub had against him as far as tallying up his total ranking points. Top 4 again, Ember, Zen, Yasmin, Augustus. So out of any of those situations so far, we're seeing a similar instance where Ember, Zen, Yasmin, Augustus are the 4 best healers in the game. And now Nub Nub is actually number 5. So if we remove speed altogether, Nub Nub is number 5, which is a little bit more representative of his skill set. But when we consider those other ones like attack, though, I mean, you have to kind of determine yourself which of these stats or traits you find to be more important as far as determining who the best healer is, because obviously there's a lot of different facets that can go into this. So now if we break it down into just the core aspects of maybe what are the best or most important aspects of a healer. So I picked out 5 of the most important traits here, and those are going to be defense, skill, health. Those are the 3 main core stats because all 3 of those are important for healers. And then their support, and then the energy cost. Those 5 things I think are the most important aspects of being a healer. And so the results here now are top 4, Ember, Zen, Cobressa, Augusta. So the big difference here is we saw Yasmin drop out of the top 4 for the first and only time. And actually Cobressa found her way in. I believe Cobressa found her way in partially because of her high base stats here. She has high skill, she has high health, and she has a pretty high defense as well. So as far as just survivability, Cobressa is really high. So she got factored out with some of the other ones because of those more intangibles like the ascension cost or the availability or speed and things like that. That's why she was lower on others. And then number 5 here was actually Bobble, which Bobble hadn't made it out of the bottom of the barrel for quite a while, but his base stats are also pretty decent aside from his health. So something to consider there. So if we were to wrap all these up together, the only thing that I can say with certainty is definitely Ember, Zen, Yasmin, and Augustus are definitely amongst the best 4 healers in the game. And now in terms of who you're actually going to go after, I would probably prioritize Yasmin above almost everybody else because she's easiest to get. Zen, Ember, and Augustus are all going to be tough for you to acquire, especially early on in the game. So the sooner you get those, obviously, the better. But in terms of priority, I would have to say Yasmin's got to be towards the top. But I won't give you a definitive best healer in the game, but I will give you the best 4 or 5 healers in the game. That's what we've seen here. So the overall, mathematical or statistical breakdown here, if we wanted to consider the best of the best as far as healers, it's going to be those 4. So Yasmin, Zen, Ember, and Augustus should be your priority. So if you have any disputes here, if you find some people should be higher or maybe some extra weight towards some of the intangibles or maybe some less weight towards some of the other aspects, I would love to hear the feedback on this. I would also like to know what types of heroes you'd actually see compared next. In addition to that, if you want to see other heroes, what are some of the attributes that you think are most important for those heroes? So for example, if we're comparing tanks, instead of considering the support column, we might think of tanky things like who actually has a designated taunt ability or something like that. So let me know what you think in the comments, and if you have questions or concerns, you can always hit me up with a private message if you like. So as always, thanks for watching, and stick around. Thanks.